And still to come this evening, GT&T goes in search of its Guyana star.
Of that I'm sure. She smiled at me in the subway. She was with another man.
Now, I really have to listen to
I've
that
got a plan.
here. In other news this evening,
Tune in right here on February 17 for the premiere of the GT&T Jingle and Song Competition 2013. Live your music.
Program which looks at issues of interest to you. Welcome to tonight's program with Dr. Grantley Warren.
43 years ago, we celebrated our first matrimony. Celebration after hard work, we were told it meant. It was also the time when we attained what was called the final act of nationhood by our political leaders. The Republic was born. The Queen was to be replaced by a head of state who was to be called the President, and one who came from among us. I was then a young graduate in my 20s, engaged in the world of work. And the world was either at my feet or the sky was the limit. At best, I bought into those notions. 43 years later, where are we as a sovereign nation? What did 43 years of manning our own destiny mean? That child that was born, now a middle-aged man, that is the state. What has he become? We have three gentlemen who are products of that very era. And we will engage in some nostalgic reminiscences and hopefully distill some truths about our current condition and how probably we could make the next 43 years more meaningful. Tonight, with us on Spotlight are Mr. Raul Lucas, from my left. Raul, son of the soil, chartered public accountant by profession and many other things, university lecturer. I should say that as good Guyanese, we met on our way in the international public service when we both served in the United Nations in Africa. Mr. Lincoln Lewis, another esteemed son of the soil who needs no introduction, but I think from our reminiscences, a man who challenged the PNC-led government when it seemed to him that they were doing wrong, and who continues now to be challenging the existing government when he deems that they are acting inappropriately. Then we have Mr. Donald Ainsworth, another esteemed son of the soil who acquitted himself at the highest levels in this country as a minister of education in this country. Now he has lived out, like so many other Guyanese, the better part of his years in the cold, manning the school system in the United States. Gentlemen, we will take a little bit of time out from some of the other things that Spotlight does to look at these matrimony celebrations and use the opportunity to reflect and at the same time distill and hopefully come up with some approaches to some solutions as to how we might treat with the next set of years with which we may be blessed. Like me, as I indicated in introduction, you were of that generation. In the most succinct of manners, could you tell us, Danny, let's start with you, because this was part of an area that you covered while you were a minister of the government. What were some of your dreams, your hopes, your aspirations, your as it stands, your optimism, if there was any?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for having me in the spotlight this evening. 43 years after Republican status, it's a little difficult to celebrate March Ramani. I think it is Morgan Heritage, that Jamaican reggae group that once commented in Jamaica, is there anything to smile about when you looked at the social and economic conditions in that land? Now, in Guyana, at this point in time, when March Ramani is supposed to be a celebration after hard work and successful work. And as you look around, I dare say there's not anything to celebrate, apart from the fact that we are still alive. When we look at the social conditions, the conditions of our city, the schools, the work environment, everything seems to be going down the tubes. 1970, I was a teenager, bright-eyed, looking to the future with confidence. Because at that time, we got the distinct impression that as Guyanese, we would have been able to make positive contribution to the development of this nation. And I think that along the way, many of us were given those opportunities, and we acquitted ourselves very well, both locally and internationally. I think you mentioned as a young man, you and Raul met in Africa as international public servants, and it must have been as a result of some of the experiences you have gathered working in Guyana. And at that time, the future looked very bright. All were involved. There were training programs available to folks in and out of school. I remember as the Minister of Education, during the time when we were having the mass games, for example, where we were involving our young people in art, in dance, in music, and we were really displaying the history and the progress of Guyana in a direct manner where all the people could understand what it is we were doing. At the education level, we had universalized education from the nursery right on to university. And things seem to have been going places. But sad to say, 43 years after, what I'm seeing is not cause for optimism. For example, we talk about folks having a few more CXCs and so on, but those are products of the after-school lessons syndrome. Pictures just 4 and 5 years are going to lessons after school,
Yeah,
There's no
Daddy,
training for young
I
people.
know that education means a lot to you, and you want to talk about it. I'm certain you'll have ample opportunity as we progress in the course of the program. Lincoln, perhaps you may tell us what was your state of mind 40 years ago. 43, that is. Yes.
I have grown up in a family that believe in self-determination, and that self-determination has been influenced by the old question that they see slavery as an abominable act, and my great-grandmother, who I've had the opportunity of seeing, living and growing and seeing, has always hammered some things into our generation, some thoughts. She felt that things like slavery and indentureship, they were bad. So I grew up understanding this and living in a colonial society, and then acquiring a Republican status. I see it as a great stride, a great achievement in pursuit of our own self-determination as a people. And I come from a poor family, but while I come from a poor family monetarily, I come from a family that is proud of its history. And because of that, I see it in a different perspective. Today we are going to be celebrating. I felt that that give us hope. Republican status give us hope, give a new generation. It was the time when the world was talking, the South was talking about controlling the commanding heights of the of the natural resources and what have you. And I see it as a break for Guyanese young men and women. I see it as a time when they were talking about women must have equal rights. I see it that women were now many women were breaking the barriers and becoming engineers and what have you. And in some cases in the craft field, many of them were becoming electricians and mechanics that they knew. It was a new era, an era that was full of optimism, buttressed by a level of passion by the individuals. Today we're going to celebrate, a couple of days from now we're celebrating Mashramani as we start, we're in the mood and we're going with events. And then what they said, Mashramani is celebration after hard work. The question today that the work is not here. I'm a trade unionist and we are now caught up in a position where we now have to start fighting for respecting our nationalism, our national position. We have to fight now for jobs that our own money have created. You know,
like I said to Danny, you are a trade unionist, and I know you can't help wanting to bring immediately into your opening comments matters that affect labor. But for the moment, you will hold it because you'll have ample opportunity through the course of the program. You're an accountant. I hope I don't.
No, thank you very much, Grantley. You know, let me say this. 43 years ago, you know, I saw Guyana as my El Dorado. And even 43 years later, I still see it as El Dorado. You know, to me, because of certain events in my life, I saw Guyana as being always on the cusp of change. You know, in 1966, I entered St. Stanislaus College, and it was the same year that we had independence. You know, then 4 years later, there was another change. We moved to Republican status, and within that time period, you know, we opened the campus at Turkine, the University campus at Turkine, and I had a chance as a young person to attend the University of Guyana, where I got my, you know, first set of post-secondary education. Even when I was in school, you know, I found myself having to do modern mathematics instead of the old stuff that we were doing in the past. I found when I entered school, we started doing Latin, but then we dropped that for the more modern languages. So to a certain extent, for me, during that era, you know, life represented change. And I really thought that Guyana indeed was poised, based upon a number of developments, you know, to change the lives of many of us, change the circumstances in which many of its citizens found themselves, and therefore perhaps position itself to perhaps even change elements of our social and international relations. And I think to a certain extent we even attempted to do that, or at least we made some efforts through the non-aligned movement. We held a ministerial meeting of the foreign ministers of the non-aligned here in 1975. We then also hosted the Action Program for Economic Cooperation that dealt with trade, transport, and industry following that foreign ministers meeting. And then, of course, a lot of the discussion about development took place within the realm of the United Nations. And there I also had an opportunity where I represented Guyana in the Economic and Finance Committee, which we normally would call the Second Committee of the United Nations General Assembly. You know, again, having an opportunity to participate in what looked like a positive change. So I must say that I always feel that there's some hope beyond the horizon. And in as much as things right now do not look as promising as I thought they ought to be looking, I remain hopeful that perhaps we can still make Guyana the El Dorado that we know it can be.
Interesting perspective, reflecting a separation of some years. Notwithstanding, I tell you, Lincoln made the point, having grown up in the colonial era, and the captains of industry at that time who served only that interest, the interest of the colonial masters. We were told that we were going to be our own masters when we engaged the decolonization process through the independence to which Rawle averted, and thoughtfully to have been culminated at the time of the attainment of Republican status. All of the legal instruments were, as it were, repatriated to these boundaries. We were told that we would increasingly enjoy a better sense of welfare. And this was going to be on the basis of all of us having an opportunity for better paying jobs and more jobs. One time even at that stage we were talking about bringing our comrades, our friends, our brothers from the Caribbean to help us share in this increased state of welfare. The small man was going to be a real man. Those of us who lived through that era would remember those words only too well. Was this a false premise?
I do not believe it was a false premise. I believe that we, as a people, have made mistakes, and we must accept those mistakes. Accept, if we want to move forward, accept and recognize that the mistakes were made. I believe that the program or the thoughts that were expounded then about making the small man a real man and how it can be done, I believe those thoughts, that position is relevant right now. It is relevant because the problems of this society cannot be addressed by just a few people and a few companies being established. If we are going to, you talk about work. If we are going to put people to work, we have to create work. We have to create jobs for them. We have to build an economy that everybody can make a contribution to and benefit from. I do not believe that today we have a program that addresses, or the thoughts for a program that addresses building an economy that everybody can benefit from. I believe, let me say to you, Burnham took us into republic, independence and republic. In your introduction, you said that I was one of the persons who only, in fact, what you were saying, in fact, is holding the PNC feet to the fire on a number of issues when I perceived that.
Yes, I was as old as you and I could remember that too.
Yes. Let me say to you very clearly. We misinterpreted Burnham and his program. We definitely misinterpreted Burnham and his program. You know, let me give you a vivid example. A young lady called me from Linden about 2 weeks ago, and she said, I went to a meeting and she called the police, but I can't remember. She said, and I heard my regional chairman talking about Burnham. And he said what Burnham did. She said, I never knew that the housing scheme that I live in was Burnham. I never knew that the housing scheme that my sister lived in, it was Burnham who built it. And she said, what struck me is that the guy said to me, the regional chairman said to them that when, at that time, when you're given a house, you walk and you push a key in the door. But today you have been given a piece of land, either where there is no road or where we're in the middle of a forest. I use that as an example to tell you that these were things that were adumbrated at that period of our history. And while those were positive, the little negatives, we fought against them. We fought against the issue of being self-sufficient by producing our own food. We fought against replacing wheat flour with rice flour, which was one of the big of these. I'm saying to you, now today as I travel, and I believe I traveled in every country in this continent, in the South American continent, and in every health food show that I went to, I see rice flour inside. You know? I want to tell you that while I fought against these type of things, I'm saying to you that we didn't understand the program at that time. If we had embraced those things at that time, like as the previous Minister of Agriculture was Robert Passad, he was talking about grow more, but he never said grow more food. And many of the elements were the elements that came out of the one-off feed, clothes, and all program. What has happened, as I said, we misinterpreted not only Burnham, but we undermined the program. And I hope that we can make amends for that and embrace some of the things to move this country forward.
You see, Granty, I think that we underestimated the influence of the colonial period. When you study the Guyanese society and developments over the years, I think at the political level we were way ahead of the perception of the people and what development entailed. We were so entrapped in thinking that everything foreign was better that we failed to recognize that not only were we going to maintain our independence, but we were going to create jobs for ourselves. We were going to create industries for ourselves. We were going to introduce technology which would have taken us forward. And like Lincoln, sometimes I like to mention some personal experiences I had. I remember in around 83, 84 thereabout, when we were having problems with the rice flour and the this and the that and the other. My last son was a few months old, and I had gone into the interior, and I had seen the folks in Lethem doing farine and tapioca and so on and so on, and they were giving it to the children. So I bought some of it and I took it over. I said, Wendy, you know, I see the people using this thing for children and things and so on, you know, why not give it to the boy? She said, my child would not be using that. Less than 6 weeks after, her mother sent a barrel to her from the United States. And there was this fancy box by Gerber food, baby food, right? It was farine, tapioca, and rice flour, right? And here it is. She was feeding it to the child. I said, what is the difference between this and that? She said, I don't care about no difference. My child eating the one that come from that. You know, and that could be replicated in so many different ways. It was a question of, we were still colonials in our mind. Even though you had political freedom, intellectually and psychologically, we had not been free. Mm-hmm. And we are our worst own enemies that our economy is where it is at this point in time. Because had we done those things, we would have, so many more things would have happened.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Raul, just before, we'll go to break and then we'll come back to you. And I'm happy to note that Lincoln was able to advocate some other things. I think he didn't touch on the question of, he just said inappropriate models. And I thought that he was going to be making comment about a model of development which sees significant debt being created in various forms, but which does not carry with it a concomitant responsibility to create jobs and meaningful jobs for Guyanese. You will take that up apart from your own reflections, and then we'll go to break at this time.
Alcatel FM radio phone from GT&T.
Ron.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, the points that both Danny and Lincoln have made are, I think, very valid points. But there's something that I think we also have to keep in mind, in that during the period that Guyana was experimenting with its development, it was a period of what we might call decolonization. And most of the countries who were coming out of colonialism were already searching for ways in which they can truly express their independence. And to a certain extent, you know, Guyana thought it had found a model in socialism, which, when you look at the fundamental arguments of the theory, you know, sound perfect, because you are really looking at, you're centering the attention on the human individual. And the one thing that the human individual at that time we thought could control was his or her labor. And therefore, you know, to that extent, anything that emphasized benefits to labor sounded great. And I thought, as a young man, you know, perhaps that model of development certainly, you know, was useful. But I think we have come to see over the years that the extent of the human imagination is almost limitless. And perhaps if we had been able to focus a little bit more on some of the things that were happening elsewhere around the world, where technology was being used along with labor, you know, to increase production, to increase productivity and so forth, we might have been able to overcome some of the constraints that we encountered. Because I think to a large extent, it was not for want of trying on the part of Guyanese, you know, to develop the country. I think there were many initiatives aimed at starting local industries, including our own food processing industries, processing some of our fruits, processing some of our meats, and so forth. But I think what happened was we were unable, you know, to marry that sort of creativity and enthusiasm with some of the more social, or should I say, you know, inter-territorial relations that could have helped us along the way. And our focus was, of course, the non-aligned, where we felt that perhaps we didn't want to be dictated to by either the East or the West at that time, meaning the Eastern Europeans or the Western Europeans or the Western powers. And I think we found ourselves caught up in a model that really was unsustainable. And had we, I think, you know, made the transition earlier than we did, perhaps we might have come out of some of the difficulties we experienced. We also have to keep in mind, though, that nipping at us at all times were the two issues concerning our neighbor to the east and our neighbor to the west, Suriname and Ethiopia and Venezuela. Those were always variables that we had to keep in the equation, and sometimes it wasn't easy to solve them, because it meant at times perhaps offending one or two of our friends who might also have been friends of those two countries and so forth. So Guyana really had a very difficult environment in which to pursue its development. And I don't think it was for the failure of clarity, because feed, clothe, and house the nation, I think, is an aspiration that any country or anyone would support and encourage. And I think that is something Guyana ought to be doing. The failure that I see on the part of the current administration is its unwillingness to pick up the ball from where, you know, the previous the PNC had left off, and try to improve upon the methods and ways in which development should have been pursued. So some of our objectives that this government is now trying to pursue, 20 years later, you know, could have been done a long time ago and helped to take Guyana much further along the development continuum.
Yeah. In the decolonization process, we were told that the barbarity of that system, the plantation system which preceded our first seceding to a state of independence and later to more mature nationhood, that we were going to be transformed into a more just and humane society, where the vulnerable in our community were going to be given an opportunity for some kind of a meaningful existence. 43 years later, the violence that has been unleashed by, well, let's take the one that figures so highly. Violence that has been unleashed against our vulnerable women and children is something that is really appalling. The violence of people on people, youths on youths, old men and youths on old men and old women, is just, we have just become an intolerably violent society. Why?
Let me take you with this. A fundamental element in every constitution, it speaks to the rights of citizens. And government elected officials ought to be the guardian and set the standards when it comes to honoring those rights. As we talk about, we cannot move away from observing the violence that you're talking about that has been unleashed. But the state has unleashed violence on the people. And if the state has unleashed violence on the people, then every citizen who do not see it in the way you will see it will entertain the view that violence is the right or the just thing to be done. We have had a situation in this country where mothers have don't know where mothers have lost their children's sons. They don't know, so they were told that they were killed. They don't know where they were buried. Wives have lost their husbands who have disappeared, and the state, every time something happens, and you have had situations where the state guns have been turned on young men, and the public officials, rather than giving them theirs in court, they turn to say that they were criminals. I'm saying to you that the state is responsible totally for the affair, for the current wave of violence that continue to perpetuate this society, in this society. You cannot, as a state, defend or countenance transgressing the rights of citizens and violating the laws of the land. We will have to work. It takes time. It will take time, but we'll have to work strongly. We'll have to work to make sure that we see to correct the situation. I do not believe that when we were talking about when the program was unfolded, what we did, many of us, we heard what we will get, but we never listened to the corresponding responsibilities. It will be a humane state. We will seek to give everybody an opportunity, even, and I agree with it, because even the deaf and the dumb, even the blind, all of them have their story to speak about and to make a contribution. But then in everything that we do, there's a corresponding responsibility. And I believe as citizens, on many occasions, we have not delivered on a corresponding responsibility.
Yeah, Danny, if, obviously Lincoln agreed with my abstraction of what has occurred over the last 43 years, that we seem to have become a far more coarse and violent society. If you so agree, why?
You see, some may argue that as development takes place, social relations tend to fade into the background. That is, the individual becomes more important than the community. My cell phone is more important than my brother or my sister or my cousin. My DVD takes precedence, my new Premio or Allion or whatever. The material that I gain takes precedence. So therefore the village no longer raises a child. We have the question of the broken homes where fathers cannot be found. And when you add to that the globalization environment in which we find ourselves, where the international drug trade has taken hold, and we're not immune from that, and it's concomitant social ills, added to the breach of civil rights and human rights by the state. It's a whole set of circumstances that have conspired to have this violence unleashed. For example, in today's environment where women are becoming more and more materially independent, men feel threatened. They will try to continue to keep these women in bondage, so to speak, and once the women objected, then violence is a result of that. Also, in the changing environment, we still feel that the way to solve problems is by physical violence. And if you look at, let's come back to education. If people are becoming less and less literate, they could no longer debate, they could no longer argue. Their vocabulary is limited. So if we don't agree over an issue, then if I believe I'm strong in you, then I unleash violence on you. And therefore, those are some of the issues which we have. The other problem we have is that, for whatever reason, this present administration has not approached governing this country in a holistic form. What we have is a little piece here, a little piece there, and so on. For example, let's look at the marriage situation now, where we're saying that the Guyanese people are being called upon to repay this fantastic loan that they have. But then you're giving all the work to Chinese. Mr. Bashir tries to argue that they got to cut back on the price. But then Raul, being an economist and accountant, would tell you, the Guyanese economy is losing a whole lot more than if they had said, look, we're going to pay you the full price, but we must have our workers employed. Because here it is, you're denying the people the right to work. You're denying the right for people to be exposed to new technology. Then you're denying the fact for money to be circulated within the economy that will produce more goods and services, and the money multiplies itself, and therefore the economy grows. And Lincoln being a trade unionist, they have another take on it. But by and large, what I'm saying is that everything seems to just be hodgepodge. Marriott here, Hope Canal over there, sugar factory at Skeldon. There's not a coordinated approach to deal with the drainage problems in this country. The LCD, I think that's a joke, because it is not part of a national development strategy. It looks to me as if what we're seeing here are bits and pieces of projects where somebody gets a little kickback or somebody enriches themselves at the expense of the nation. And I think what has to happen is that there has to be a national education campaign by responsible Guyanese, whether you're in the political opposition, you're NGOs, you're in the private sector, to educate folks at what it is we're facing. We are burdening our children and grandchildren with unsustainable debt, while a few people are enriching themselves. And this has nothing to do with racism, as some people in the government would like to make it go, because at the end of the day, every Guyanese will be faced with that burden.
You know, Grant, before you allow him to move off, let me just make a very quick point on this. We're talking about our Republican status. You know, and interestingly, Danny raised the question of the Marriott and what is taking place there. You know, during the construction of the textile mill, we had significant funding grant from the Chinese.
Yeah.
But you know, the lead contractor at the textile mill was the Guy Construct, a local constructing firm.
Yes.
Guy
Yes,
Construct was the lead contracting firm and get the contract to do it, and they were the Chinese were there as technical support, right? So as we talk about this whole question here of Republican status, what has happened from then to now? What has been taken away? We have been neglected. We are no longer the state that is respected as a state. Mm-hmm. We are now jellyfleck into other states.
No, that's a very interesting observation made by both Danny and Lincoln with respect to what's going on with the Marriott project. But even before I joined that conversation, what I would like to point out is, you know, a distinguishing characteristic of being a republic is the emphasis on the rule of law. That is, I can't remember who it was that made the distinction between, you know, a republic and a democracy. But the thing about a republic is that it relies on a constitution, and it relies on elected representatives to get the work done on behalf of the people. But it was also designed, the republic has also emerged as a bulwark against what we would call mob rule. And, you know, mob rule really involves where one dominant group, whether on the basis of socio-economic circumstances, cultural, religious, ethnic, or otherwise, you know, tends to exert that power, majority power, over the rest of the society. The intention of the republic, of being a republic, was designed to check that. But it looks as if, you know, that has not been the case with this current administration. I'm not so sure what it is that makes it feel that it ought to behave this way. And I think the fact that the rule of law does not seem to be something that is fully respected, even by those who are charged with enforcing the law, might indeed be sending the wrong signal to the rest of the society on how to behave. It was only today a taxi driver was telling me about an accident that occurred yesterday where this truck driver unfortunately killed a child. And the truck driver apparently came out of the vehicle to render some assistance, but once he saw that perhaps the child had been far gone, the truck driver ran away. So I asked him why. He said, well, he ran away. He thought he ran away because he was likely to be beaten by a mob. You know, so that to my mind is a reflection that the society has lost confidence in the justice system. They do not believe that that person would get the correct justice, irrespective of how it is, you know, administered. And therefore, they felt that they need to take justice in their own hands. And I understand that this is something that is happening fairly frequently in this country now. So I feel, therefore, that some of this violence that we are seeing, particularly that meted out against our women and children, is something which either wittingly or unwittingly is perhaps being transmitted by the behavior of the public officials who are responsible for enforcing the law in this country.
No, we were told during that decolonization period, and that's our frame of reference, that that the colonials divided us and kept us separate and apart. And that when we took the reins of power, national power, we will deal with all of those problems. We will heal, cement those schisms, and we will forever live in a cohesive society where all would feel as if they were involved, and that they could participate in every sphere of government and or non-government activity. Was that, are we a more cohesive society in 2013 as opposed to 1970?
Let me say to you, we are not. We are not, because we are now driven by some individual greed and what have you. Let me say it, let me put it this way to you. We are not gonna, we have to understand that our politics, but politics by very nature is competitive. And the issue of race, people say ethnicity, but I want to tell you it's not ethnicity, this is a race. It's a real problem in this country. Let us look at what has happened. Let us look at the analysis of this, of the sugar industry, for instance. During the 28 years of the PNC, every month, or sometime every week in a month, in some months, we have had the burning of sugar canes. That in itself has impacted negatively on the economy.
No, the burning of sugar cane. Remember, this is 43 years later.
Yes.
And some of our audience, they would not even have been around. So when you just say loosely the burning of sugar canes, I suspect that they could not, could that be for in a pre-cane cutting sense? To do all the things that you burn a cane peel for, get rid of snakes, increase the sucrose content and all of that. That is what they learned in school.
No.
But I think you're talking about something else. So you've got to be a bit clear.
We are talking about political sabotage, where young sugarcane was burnt. For the years that since the PNC came out of power, I do not believe that I've read 4 times where young sugarcanes were sabotaged in any area, right? I'm saying to you that it's another era, and politics was used, or in the quest of acquiring political power, the economy was sabotaged to a very large extent. But what we have today, we have, as Rod was talking about, what we are influenced by. Today we are talking about what a global age and what have you. And I was one of the persons who was against, who spoke against it, because I see the consequences coming down the road. Now, ministers of government and serious and some people no longer bank the money here. They don't bank the loot here any longer. That is out.
Now, first you talk about money, next you talk about loot. No, I am not certain. Well, it's a good thing it's not been directed at anyone for the first time. I'm glad you've been
the loot is now banked somewhere in United States or some country, some way. These people don't intend to live here, you know. So this question about unity, the people tell you about who stand on the pedestal and tell you when you are right and when you are right or when you are wrong. those people do not intend to live here. So the question of unity don't matter to them. What matters to them is the mighty dollar from the loot.
On the question of unity, I guess structurally, based on the historic development of the economy, where the villages were pretty much peopled by people of African descent, and the sugar estates were peopled by the indentured servants, I think it might still be in the statutes where it was illegal for an indentured servant to be found more than a mile away from the estate. And therefore, at one point in time, it was government policy to deliberately separate people. Colonial policy, sorry, to separate people. And I guess over the years, some of the politicians have used it to continue to divide folk as they struggle for political power. And what I'm seeing here is that people are more interested in sectorial development rather than national development. For example, in the 28 years of the PNG's governance of this state, all the efforts made to bring folk together was sabotaged by the present administration. For example, let's take the National Service, for instance, where you were trying to create opportunities for folk to get together in a common space so we could learn a little bit more of each other. We all know what happened with that. Whether it was at the university level, the high school, the primary school, all these things they fought against. When you attempted to develop housing schemes where you were trying to get folk to live collectively, there was objection to those kinds of things. And even today, when they are now trying to give out house lots as they claim, they have been discriminating against people based on the color of the skin and texture of their hair. Employment generally in the public sector, we have seen that at work. And so it appears as if there is a deliberate effort for a certain section of the Guyanese society to cordon off, what I would say, the areas for greater material wealth and deny others. For example, if you were to go along the East Coast, certain villages, the roads are well paved, the trains are clean and so on. You go to the next village, it's the opposite. You make representation, you go and talk to folks who are supposed to be able to help. They promise you, yes, we're going to, for example, let me speak of a specific example. Last year, I had a meeting with the guy, the NDIA CEO. He promised that he was going to send the machine into Victoria to clean the secondary drainage. We're still waiting for it. When you look at Enterprise and Enmore and so on, it's a whole different ballgame.
Ron, your take on this?
Well, you know, if you believe in El Dorado like me, you would realize that perhaps I might have a different view. I still have a hopeful view of things. You know, I am looking at what is available to us today as against 40 or 43 years ago. Today, we have more open access to communication. We have access to the types of communication that reduces our world to virtually seconds or minutes. So there has been, in my view, through some of the social media that have emerged as platforms on which groups can now interact, as a basis for, providing an increased understanding among people with different backgrounds or cultural backgrounds. The fact that we also can travel much easier, and each of us is getting a chance to experience different cultural environments and so forth. I think it's having an impact on some of the younger generation, and I believe that we are perhaps in a position to move in the direction we ought to be going with respect to our national unity. I think the motto of one people, one nation, one destiny is something that is still alive and well.
Worthy. You know, it's clear we are going to be running out of time, and I had assembled a number of other issues that I wanted to sample your views on. The question of our state of literacy in '73, as opposed to now. Danny has already adverted to the fact that perhaps our state of increasing literacy is to take some responsibility for our response mechanisms in cases of crisis and in conflict situations. We're not going to go there. The sense of nationhood. Even as I was about to come to this program, I saw that the 10 calypsos, including the one that won this year, have been taken off NCN. And I wonder whether the whole question of satire is dead, and the raison d'etre for the calypso and what it means, even as a corrective mechanism in the society at large, whether it doesn't have no longer has any significance. Why Trinidad has seemed to have done so well as a country, while we taking calypsos off the air because they're deemed to be anti-government. Now, such utter rubbish. Notwithstanding, what I wanted to last sample your views on was the question that attaining the Republican status, we were told that we could set up our own arrangements. We call it a constitutional arrangements. And we set up parliament, and we set up an executive with whom we give responsibility to nationally execute some plans and programs, and that the parliament presumably should have oversight. And then we had the judiciary set up there to help us navigate our way. But in most recent times, it seems as if the judiciary is playing not just a role to help rationalize difficulties among people and the state, but it looks like the judiciary is now coming in a more functional sense in the running of the state. What do we have here, and is this what we contemplated when we set about this story, to take over the national instruments and run our lives? Quick comment. It's got to be very brief.
Yeah. Let me say to you that the Constitution is a very good instrument that we should all embrace. And let me say further that it is the culture of the people who form this executive, who believe that they should dictate to people, that they are not prepared to accept that the parliament is the supreme authority when it comes to the question of supervision, of supervising the activities in this country. And until such time that they have come to that realization, we're going to continue to be in the position where we are. They have been running to the court, and the court has not been giving anything definitive for them to hold on. If these people can, if the court did not, if they run to the court on the budget and they did not give them the authorization, say to them that they can go and put back all the money and spend the money, and they went back and spend that money, it's indicative the people of the mindset of the people you're dealing with.
Danny, quickly.
Democracy means different things to different people. And when they argue that they restored democracy in 1992, well, if what we have now is democracy, well, you know,
it does mean something.
It does mean something.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, it is the people of this country that will have to determine if they are going to continue to live under this oppressive situation, or if they are going to ensure that they do take control of the society and govern it in their best interest.
Ron?
Yeah, my view is that I don't think the people of this country have been paying sufficient attention to what the government has been doing. Because if they were, I think they would realize that there are many things that are happening that are directly impacting their lives. And this belief that, you know, they are powerless, I don't know where that has emerged from, but I certainly remember when we were youngsters at university and so forth, and something happened, we expressed our views, and in some instances we pushed real hard against the government of the day, but it looks as if perhaps those lessons never really were carried forward.
Those would be the last words on this issue of Spotlight, lessons not being carried forward, being the operative terms. On tonight's Spotlight, we dedicated this last hour to looking at what was in 73, and more importantly, our hopes and aspirations. 1970, sorry, I don't know where I got 73 from. Thanks. Our hopes and aspirations as young men who are now older people, and for those kids who have not lived through those early years when these aspirations, real, we thought then achievable aspirations, could inform our lives, but who are now left almost rudderless in a certain sense. And I think 43 years after that Republican status, we owe it ourselves to just take stock. We've got to do better than we have done. Our politics and our leaders has just got to be put on a different path. People have got to start respecting one another. Everyone has got the right to a view, and they should be able to canvass it and at the same time responsibly listen to others and take counsel. I don't know what other piece of advice on this our 43rd anniversary one can issue, but Spotlight thought of doing this program purely with the intention of just keep reminding ourselves that we got a long way to go based against the aspirations that we had set ourselves as young men and women 43 years ago, when some of us were enjoined into this struggle and others came on later. Happy Mashramani to all and sundry, and may I say thanks to Mr. Raw Lucas, Mr. Lincoln Lewis, and Mr. Donald Ainsworth for spending this hour with us in celebration of Mashramani.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're all and saying good night.
The new Alcatel FM radio phone from GT&T.
Complete your loved one's great